Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan
you gotta be confident about your Achilles when you
Chase
show
Thornton,
Yeah, I mean, I got him at
and Adam LaRue. Don't hope to it. Be great and dominate.
All right, welcome into Operation Domination here on the Fantasy Football Advice Network. I am Chase Thornton. You can see Adam LaRue here with me. No Dan Mater this week. Dan's out. He's got plenty going on his end. He's allowed to take some time off too. So it's just the two of us here this week. But there's a lot to talk about going on right now in fantasy football. We've had, news happening this week. The draft's finally done. We finally got the schedule came out. So we have a much better idea of what the season is going to look like in terms of, a timeline and who's going to be ready when and who's going to be facing who when. So a lot to talk about. But first off, before we dig into it, Adam, how you doing?
Doing well. Yeah, excited to talk about the news this week. This is kind of like the last gasp before the so-and-so like dead zone of the NFL calendar. So we get one more really big week of news and kind of until camps start going, there's not a whole lot to talk about, which is great because it gives us time to dive into some of the things we're going to dive into over the offseason and as far as tiers and positions and getting rankings ready for the upcoming season. So we'll definitely have a lot to talk about, but in terms of like a big news dumps, I feel like this is the last big thing we're going to get outside of injuries or other unexpected happenings.
Yeah. Outside of something crazy happening during OTAs and mandatory mini camps and that coming up, or somebody, unexpected signing or trade or whatever that doesn't necessarily happen a lot of times this time of year. Otherwise, we're waiting to see the AJ Brown trade that we all assume is going to happen go down. We're waiting to, see some of those kinds of things. But let's jump into what's going on actually right now. First off, I hate to start things on like ostensibly a negative count, but Rashee Rice, who I think everybody on this show universally likes as a player and as a fantasy asset. But Rashee, you dumb ace. Here's the thing that if you haven't heard yet, you will be hearing about it. Rashee Rice is now serving a 30-day jail sentence for violation of his probation stemming from his 2024 Dallas highway crash while racing. If you remember that a couple years ago, he was racing with friends on a Dallas highway going astronomical speeds, crashed. People were injured. The big hullabaloo. He ended up serving initially, I believe, a 6-game suspension for that from the NFL that year. He was initially sentenced legally. He was initially sentenced to 30 days in that case, but it was deferred for him to be able to serve kind of when he chose. I guess wealth and fame have their privileges, because I guarantee you or I would have been immediately locked up. But this week, a positive THC test, so basically a positive marijuana test, violated the terms of that probation. So now he is serving that sentence right now involuntarily at the leisure of the state of Texas. It means that he's going to miss OTAs, voluntary OTAs, to be clear about that. There's some voluntary stuff going on right now, quote unquote. He's going to miss their mandatory minicamp, however, over the next few weeks as well. And one of the big things that kind of came out is that this is going to interrupt his rehab, because about a week ago, he had a knee cleanup procedure. He obviously banged his knee there early that one season and has been kind of dealing with that since. And he had just had surgery. Now 4 weeks, 4+ weeks in the clink, is not going to be able to, rehab like with the team like he would have been. So crazy stuff going on here. Okay. So I guess a couple things we want to look at. First off, how do we think this affects his outlook for 2026, right? Do we think he's going to be suspended? Does it make you worry about his knee now? Are you willing to draft him? What are your thoughts on him just just for this year alone, real quick, coming into 2026?
Yeah, I mean, he's still certainly draftable. It's just like, how much does this hurt his outcome? And it's it's one of those things where you already, based on his injury history and based on who he's been off the field and the sample that we have at this point, like, you already kind of stenciled him in, at least in my projections, which aren't quite done yet. But I was penciling him around 13, 14 games as is. Like, at this point, I can't put you higher than that, just with what I've seen so far. So that is part of it, right? Because it, if anything, pushes that number further down. He's kind of, to your point, the rehab quality where he's at can't be what it was going to be with the team. And he was already, going to be rehabbing into, July, August territory. So there's some concerns there, and it's just one of those things, man, where we've seen time and time again with him that he can't get out of his own way. I mean, hopefully that you would think that actually going to jail as an NFL player would be a wake-up call, but like,
smack in the face.
Hope that 5 other things at this point would have been wake-up calls. So it's hard to really believe that that's the case. So it's one of those things where if he gets suspended again later in the year, are you really that shocked? Like, it's one of those assets that's kind of a ticking time bomb, even in redraft.
Yeah. No, right now in half-point PPR redraft, as of this afternoon, now give the market maybe a little bit of time to adjust as everybody kind of lets this and digests this information. But as of right now, he's going at wide receiver 7, 21st overall, which is a late second round pick. He's going ahead of Drake London. He's going ahead of Malik Neighbors. He's going ahead of George Pickens. He's going ahead of Nico Collins. He's going right in the same area where you're going to be able to get, say, Chase Brown, Derrick Henry, Jeremiah Love. So right in that late running back 1, early running back 2 type window. Josh Allen goes around there. So, I mean, there are other options there. Redraft wise, I mean, are you taking him ahead of, say, Nico Collins or George Pickens?
I mean, not now. Like, if I'm drafting today, no. Now, if we get some maybe clarity on what this firmly means, like, is a suspension now looming because he, like, what ends up actually happening game wise, and how is his rehab going when we start really ramping up redraft drafts in August, then maybe I still would, because we talked about this a couple weeks ago. I think his upside is like a top end wide receiver 1. Like, this is why it's so frustrating, because he has like league winning capabilities. He's that type of player, but he can't get out of his own way. And it's really frustrating. He's a great player. He's a great player when he's on the field, but I mean, yeah, you're talking about a guy who is elite when he's on the field. He has a 74.6% catch rate in his career. He catches basically 75% of the balls that come to him. As a wide receiver, that is an elite number. There are very few guys in the league who catch that many. And when he gets the ball in his hands, he's very good with it. I'm not as worried about the knee procedure either this season or long-term, unless something further comes out. I mean, yeah, he's not going to be able to rehab with the team, but he's still going to have access to, say, medical care in jail. And I would think he knows what he's, kind of what he has to do and what he's supposed to do. I would assume the team has been in contact with him in some way, shape, or form too, as far as that goes. From the league standpoint, in terms of a possible suspension, the league has basically just said, okay, we're aware of it, and we're following it, and they don't have any further comment at this time. But there are avenues through the collective bargaining agreement with the union, and that they could count this as a repeat offense for him. Yeah. They could, he can get caught under their substance abuse policy because it was a THC, because it was a THC thing that hung him up. They could get him under the substance abuse. They could get him under a repeat offender thing. There's all kinds of things they could do if they wanted to. Yeah. From that angle, it's like really interesting because they've been much more lax in recent years on the weed thing. But at the same time,
this is a violation of probation.
It's a probation violation, exactly. So like, how does that change the math here? So it's really interesting to follow like that aspect of it and how that plays out and how that can kind of impact cases down the line, because it's kind of a precedent setter.
And again, we've talked before about not drafting too early in the damned year. This here is a perfect case of it. This is a guy, like you said, has possible league winning type upside as a player if and when he's on the field. And the closer we get to the season, I would assume we'll get more of a clear idea as to whether he's going to be suspended or not. So until that comes out, I have a hard time ranking him in my top 10 just based on what we think we're going to get out of him. Now, you could treat it the same way that you treated it when he was suspended 2 years ago for it, because if you did take him that year, you got some good production out of him when he was on the field. From a dynasty standpoint here, knowing that he's a repeat idiot, okay, and having seen guys like Josh Gordon in the past, like tank themselves because of these kinds of, repeat violations. Listen, it doesn't matter what your moral take on weed or legal take on weed and on marijuana and THC use and whatever it is. The point is, you can't be doing it in his situation based on the league rules and based on the legalities of wherever you are in the minute. So you've got to just be intelligent about that. He has millions of dollars riding on the line. So we've talked about how elite he can be. His points per game have risen each of his 3 years in a league when he's been on the field. His points per target or his career are, honest to goodness, better points per target over the course of his career than Jamar Chase, than Amon-Ra St. Brown, better than Justin Jefferson, better than CeeDee Lamb, better than Drake London, better than JSN, better than Malik Neighbors was last year, better than Nico Collins, all of whom are ranked in front of him dynasty ECR wise. Right now, expert consensus ranking, he's the dynasty wide receiver 15. He's right behind Emeka Egbuka and Garrett Wilson. He's just ahead of Carnell Tate and Ladd McConkey. But those guys I named off are all superstars in this league, and he is better than each of them per target. The rub is, in the 3 games he's been in the league, he has only been able to play 28 out of 51 games, either for injury or for stupidity. That's less than 55% of his games. So the targets he sees are elite, but he's not on the field to see those targets. What are you doing with him, or what is your take on him for dynasty? And if you're willing to sell, or if you're looking to buy, whatever, what do you think his value is right now based on his latest round of idiocy?
I'm really curious to see where he settles, because to your point, ECR is at 15. ADP, I think, at least of what I'm looking at, he's a little closer to 17. So that just kind of being the difference between the expert leagues and the masses.
And the everyday Joes, yep.
Yeah, exactly. Either way, like if you told me that Ladd McConkey, Rome Odunze, maybe even Luther Burden, Marvin Harrison, like guys like that, Devonta Smith even like is another guy behind him. Like if you told me guys like that passed him, like were you really that shocked? And at that point, it becomes an intriguing buy proposition to me. It really does. It's one of those where kind of depends on where your team situation's at, because it's a high risk, high reward play at that cost at that point, right? Because it's exactly what you said with Josh Gordon. If you told me that Rashee Rice was out of the NFL just because of who he is by 28 years old, then I wouldn't really, wouldn't be that shocked, right? If he acted his way out of the NFL in 2 years, not that shocked. If he puts up high-end wide receiver 1 numbers for the next 3 years, not that shocked. Like the outcome range is obscene with him. So I think, even now, I think the juice is worth the squeeze a little bit, but I'm definitely curious to see where he settles. He's one where, man, especially in rebuilds, I think he's very interesting, because that's kind of that point, right, where you're trying to acquire value wherever you can. So it's one of those. You're trying
to underpay for things to get back.
Yes.
Yeah, you're
so if you're if you're looking for a swing, you're either striking out or you're going yard. Like this is that.
So in that case, you're a rebuilding team, not a contender. You're a rebuilder. What are you willing to offer for him to try and get him in the door then as a rebuild team, and knowing that youth and draft capital are, gold for you? Superflex, we'll assume Superflex because we've talked about this before. Most of the dynasty realm out there is Superflex. Superflex, you're a rebuilder. What are you willing to give for him?
I mean,
offer.
Me personally, if I'm in a league that hasn't drafted yet, this is awesome. Because, like, say I'm at, I don't know, 5. I bet a Rashee Rice holder would think about 5. And a 5 in 2026 is not a normal 5, but it looks like a normal 5, depending on who's looking.
Right.
So it's one of those things where it's like, all right, I can't get Tate, I can't get Mendoza, I can't get Love. We're getting pretty interesting at that point. You know what I mean? They can't get Tyson. Like, after Tyson, Tate, Mendoza, Love are gone. If I can get Rashee Rice, I'd do it.
Yeah, you're at that point. You're trading Casey Concepcion on the Browns, or Denzel Boston on the Browns, or Kenyon Sadiq on the Jets, or any of 120 running backs who are never going to be probably more than backups long term. That's what you're trading to try and get Rashee Rice on your team. And I just told you that per target, Rashee Rice is absolutely among the elites in the league. Better than Chase, better than Amon-Ra St. Brown, better than Jefferson. We can argue whether he's actually a better player than them, but fantasy value per target, he is. That's just math, folks. That's not even my take on it. That's just math. So, okay, yeah, Rashee Rice, yeah, interesting proposition. I agree with you. I'm willing to give a mid first up for him this year. I'm willing to honestly give a late first if I think I'm going to have a late first next season. If I'm a rebuilder and I've got multiple firsts next year, I'm going to look at my league. I'm going to say which of my firsts is going to be the last one. I'd be willing to toss that out there because everybody's all hopped up for next year's draft, right? Because they always are. Next year's draft is always the best draft that's ever happened, and it's always better than this year's. And we think that's especially true this year because everybody's down on 2026. If I've got a late 2027 first that is available to me, I'm willing to give that to him as well. All right, so moving on from Rashee Rice, the other big news we got this week, Aaron Rodgers finally puts pen to paper, finally shows up for real in Pittsburgh, finally actually meets with Pittsburgh, and the deal is done. Aaron Rodgers is going to be your starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers as long as he is healthy in 2026. So, we look at that situation. Okay. He gets just over $15 million for the year as a base contract. He can incentivize that up to $25 million or so. So he's not taking a ton of money, to be dead honest. He's actually, I think he's making this a team friendly deal. I don't know necessarily. I haven't looked into what all those incentives are, but based on what he did last year, I mean, I doubt he's hitting anything that's too giant of an incentive. You look at him last year, he was a QB 17 overall for points scored, but on a points per game basis, just a QB 26. And that's just from a dynasty standpoint here. But he stated very bluntly when he was asked by a reporter in his press conference, he was asked, is this your last year? And he said, yes, this is it. Like literally that was a quote. This is it. So he claims this is his last year. Now, we've seen that before, and he learned from the best in Brett Favre in terms of waffling on the end of your career. But this is a team that added Michael Pittman Jr. They added Jeremy Bernard in the draft. They added Rico Dowdle. They added Eli Heidenreich in the backfield there. They lost Kenneth Gainwell. They lost Jonnu Smith. They lost Calvin Austin. They lost guard Isaac Sumalo off of that offensive line, which any changes to his offensive line at this point in his career, are important, I think. We talk about his performance last season. His completion percentage actually was above his career average. He had a high completion percentage last year relatively, but
I
Hey.
Welcome.
So you were fine on your end, because I'm sure it was me, because my wife was on a Zoom like meeting with the theater board too, and hers cut out, and neither one of us was getting anything more than 4G. But then everything came back on. It didn't even work to reset the router. It had to be something going on with Spectrum on our end. So
yeah.
So once again, I may be calling Mosaic tomorrow, because they actually do have the fiber optic labeled in our neighborhood now, as of like a week or two ago.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
So anyway, how do we want to do this? Because I don't know. I don't necessarily see where quite we were.
Yeah, I marked down and you cut out from my end. So
yeah, because I don't know what we were. I don't necessarily know where we were talking, or like where exactly I was in my point about Rodgers, or when.
I mean, we hadn't really gotten too deep into Rodgers. If you just want to restart with Rodgers.
Yeah, let's just do that, and then if we can splice it together or whatever, that's fine. So just restart from the beginning of the Rodgers. I'll just restart the beginning of the Rodgers conversation.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey. So we move from Rashee Rice and his idiocy to another kind of, frustrating. I don't know. Some people think it's idiocy, buffoonery, whatever. But Aaron Rodgers this week finally sets pen to paper, actually made a visit to Pittsburgh and met with the team this time. There were rumors last time he was in Pittsburgh he didn't meet with them and everything else. But now we have clarification, and it is official that Aaron Rodgers has signed. He will be the starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers, provided he stays healthy in 2026. Now, so when I look at this, the Aaron Rodgers going to Pittsburgh thing, it's an interesting situation as a football fan. It's a frustrating / confusing time to be looking at him from a fantasy standpoint. Okay. On the one hand, I mean, yeah, he was not great last season for fantasy. I mean, he was fine for them. They did make the playoffs. They got what they were looking for, I guess, from him in terms of, winning enough games to make the postseason and giving themselves a chance. He was a 2025 quarterback 17 overall for fantasy. He was 26th, though, in points per game. And a big part of that is he's just not able anymore to push the ball down the field, in my opinion, right? Last season, his completion percentage actually was better than his career average for completion percentage. He did fine that way, but part of it is because he just kept throwing the ball to anything that was literally right in front of him, right? He can't really run anymore. He never was really a running quarterback in the pure sense of the word, but he was always mobile enough to be able to make things happen. And he was athletic enough that when he did run, he was a threat, at least. He also had the fewest attempts per game of his career last season for a full season's worth of work. So, I mean, they were, to some extent, they might have been protecting him as well in that offense. How much of that was Arthur Smith being Arthur Smith, and how much of that was protecting themselves against Aaron Rodgers? I don't know if we'll ever know. But he's going right now as a quarterback 30 in redraft, 177 overall right now. That's a mid 15th round pick. So essentially, if you want Aaron Rodgers on your team for whatever reason in redraft, you're able to get him right now. And I expect that number to maybe go up a little now that we have flat confirmation that he will be the starter. It's not speculation anymore. But this is a team that has added, I mean, their comings and goings this offseason are interesting. They added Michael Pittman Jr. They added Jeremy Bernard in the draft. They added Rico Dowdle and Eli Heidenreich in the backfield. But they lost Kenneth Gainwell. They lost Jonnu Smith. They lost Calvin Austin forever, whatever you think that means. They did lose their guard, Isaac Seumalo. And at this point in his career, with him being not as mobile as he used to be, and with, their pass game, losing Isaac Seumalo could be a big deal there. So I guess what I want to look at right now real quick is, what do you think this says about him for redraft? What do we make of this Pittsburgh offense for redraft? He did state now he's making $15 million this year. He's incentivized up to $25 million. So, I mean, he's not raking this team over the coals necessarily for money. But he did say this is it. This is his last year. This is the last hurrah. So you got to assume this is a win now thing. What do we ultimately think his value is for this season right now. And do you want anything to do with this Steelers offense, knowing that he's the quarterback?
It's definitely an improvement over the alternative, at least the alternatives that have presented themselves at this point in Aller and Howard and Rudolph. So from that perspective, I'm glad he came back. He's not someone who's not going to be on my radar as a top 12 quarterback option. Like as far as starting in redraft or in normal 1 QB redraft leagues. In the odd 2 QB redraft league, I think that there's a conversation to be had, but I'm sure we'll get a little bit more down that road when we talk Dynasty. As far as right now in the redraft kind of outcomes of this, I think it's good for pretty much everyone involved. If you want to say that anyone maybe takes any kind of hit, to your point, I think his arm's still there. Obviously not all the way there, but I think that he could throw down the field if he wasn't so dang afraid of getting hit. He does not seem like one who wants to see any type of contact. To your point, the athleticism is very clearly gone. So he can't move in the pocket, doesn't want to be hit. His opportunities to throw down the field don't really exist as a part of that. So regardless of how it happens, it doesn't really happen at any rate, or regardless of why, I guess. So with all that to say, if you told me that DK Metcalf would benefit from a Drew Aller, I probably wouldn't disagree too strongly, right? So if you want to say he loses out a little bit because of him coming back, otherwise everyone else sees an uptick. How much of one is kind of hard to say. It's tough with this offense, just to predict the passing volume because of what they were coming from.
Right.
Because if it upticks enough with McCarthy, right? I know I just talked about him as a faller a couple weeks ago, but now that we officially have Rodgers back in the building and can talk about it from this lens, if you told me Pittman just got targeted to the point that it worked out, I can see it. I don't think he'll get in the end zone enough, and I don't think the yardage total is going to be anything crazy. But if you remember that Deontay Johnson season where he got 8 billion targets and 900 yards,
right,
Pittman could do that. And at a certain point, that's worth something in fantasy, right? So
yeah,
I think it benefits guys more or less across the board. The question is just how much.
Yeah, he gets remarried with Mike McCarthy for this, and he has said that was basically the reason he came back at all, was because he talked things over with Big Mike, and hey, that's who he won his Super Bowl with, and why not give it one more shot, right? But you brought up Mike, or DK Metcalf, I should say. DK Metcalf's average depth of target for his career right now is 12.2 yards, average depth of target, ADOT, right? But in his 2 years in Pittsburgh, that ADOT is 10.5 yards. It has come way in from what it was in Seattle, okay? Pittman, on the other hand, has a career ADOT of 8.5, and that has come down a little bit too. He was used in different ways depending on the stage of his career in Indianapolis, but he has a career ADOT of much shorter, and I think he's going to be running the types of routes that lend themselves much more to what it looked like Aaron Rodgers was comfortable doing last year. If you ask me, even my jaded, Packer fan ass, would I prefer Mike McCarthy calling my offense or Arthur Smith? I will take Mike McCarthy all day long, and twice on Sundays if I can get it, right, over Arthur Smith. So I think that's a positive overall for the way that the offense runs. But yeah, I tend to agree with you there in terms of, I think it benefits Pittman more than it does probably Metcalf, although DK Metcalf is still the most talented wide receiver on that roster. But can he use his talents to the best of what those talents should be? That is a question. Right now, DK Metcalf coming off the board as wide receiver 32. He's wide receiver 32 in ECR. His ADP is wide receiver 37 right now. The general public is down on him a little bit. Again, how does that change now that we know the Rodgers news? Pittman is wide receiver 47 right now. They're both free. I tend to think that probably Pittman outplays that wide receiver draft selection, maybe a little bit more. I think there's a better chance for Pittman to outplay his draft slot than Metcalf is what I'm trying to say. But so for redraft wise, I agree with you. I'm not excited about Rodgers in terms of having him on my roster as a quarterback. I'm not jumping for joy at any of these receivers here. I mean, Mike McCarthy and Aaron Rodgers, neither one of them has ever been a kingmaker at the tight end position. And now we look at it. Yes, Jonnu Smith is gone, but you still have Pat Freiermuth. You still have Darnell Washington there kind of splitting the targets. Last year, target-wise, Smith and Freiermuth split things right down the middle between the two of them. They each had 54 targets. Darnell Washington had 43 targets last year. This is still a two-headed, tight end room, right? So I'm not necessarily looking at either one of those guys as a viable starting option long-term in that offense for this year. I'm not excited about either their receivers. They lost Kenneth Gainwell, who had 85 targets. They bring in Rico Dowdle, but I don't think Rico Dowdle and Jalen Warren I don't think that they have the same split that Gainwell and Warren had last year. I don't think that that's what happens. Honestly, Eli Heidenreich might find himself as a passing down back in this kind of offense. And if he does, I mean, he may have some more value than I ever would have thought he'd have had going anywhere else, basically, in that situation. So redraft wise, I'm not overly excited about the Pittsburgh Steelers, but from a dynasty standpoint, I just think this is a really interesting look because the Rodgers signing is obviously a win now move. And if the Pittsburgh Steelers are in win now mode, it would make sense to me to have Mason Rudolph, the experienced option there, be the backup, the immediate QB2 if they are trying to win now. Even if Rodgers goes down, this team that still probably wants to win or should want to win. But they just spent a draft pick on Will Howard. They literally just spent a draft pick on Drew Aller. Can they really carry 4 quarterbacks this season? Because Rodgers and Rudolph are only both signed through this year. So they have Aller through 2029. They have Howard through 2028. They're in this weird spot in the quarterback room, stuck between win now and having 2 guys to look at and evaluate for the future in the room. Dynasty-wise, what are you doing with this quarterback room? I mean, obviously, we're probably trying to move on or hopefully moving on from Rodgers. If you can get anything for him, in my opinion, I think you do it. Whether he's your second quarterback, third quarterback, whatever. If he, what are you trying to do with this quarterback room right now, dynasty-wise? Who's your favorite? Who are you buying? Who are you selling? What do you see of it?
I'm certainly not buying Rodgers, but what I will say is there's probably some niche cases where I think he's just worth holding. Especially contender towards the end of your window. And especially like as your QB3, in your only QB3, for example, like say you genuinely have 3 quarterbacks, I think I'd just hold him. Because you're probably not getting that much for him anyways. You probably don't care about the picks immediately anyways. Like at that point, just the safety of having a viable QB2 as a backup is probably worth it. But that's probably the only case. Otherwise, I agree with you. Let's move on. I think this is awesome for Aller. A reason being kind of what you said as far as it being win now. It kind of eliminates Pittsburgh from the 2027 quarterback draft market, right? Like they could get 10 wins. They can't go up and get a quarterback, or at least not easily. Like I guess in theory, you always can, right? If you're willing to leverage enough of your future, you can do whatever you want. But it makes them a very unlikely option to move up and get a quarterback, which means your odds of Aller starting in 2027 are probably about as good as they could ever be, right? Like pretty much better than any other landing spot he could have had because the quarterback's out of the way next year. Or you've got at least a pretty good idea the quarterback's out of the way next year. So I think if you're an Aller guy, and I really liked Aller prior to this collegiate season, it was rough watching him this past season. But before that, I was really in on Aller. So if they can kind of rebuild his fundamentals from the ground up, there's something interesting there. I kind of agree with where your head's at and that Rudolph is makes sense to me as the backup. They've trusted him over through so many offensive coordinators, so many situations. Like at this point, I think this regime or the front office just likes him and trusts him and thinks he's a solid backup quarterback. And I tend to agree. I think he's a solid backup quarterback. I think him being the backup, Aller being your other guy, and candidly at this point, your previous head coach got Howard late in the draft. Like, I think that he's probably the one that loses his chair here. It's unfortunate. Maybe they can trade a late pick.
If he's the odd man out in the pecking order, is he out though in Pittsburgh? Is he still on the roster this year, do we think?
I could see him getting practice squatted. I could see him getting that preseason trade that's like, all right, I'll trade you the guy I'm going to cut for the guy that you're going to cut, and we can kind of skip this whole waiver thing. Like, that's totally, I think, in play for him. Because I do think that the league likes him to a degree. I think he would end up rostered, or at least be like the type of practice squad guy who you'd be considering as a bring up type of option in emergencies. I think he lives in that realm. Pittsburgh's room has gotten deep. So
yeah, and I don't know the legalities contract wise, CBA wise, or anything, tampering wise or anything. I mean, yeah, could they tell Will Howard, listen, okay, hey, this year you're just kind of the odd man out in the room in terms of you are going to be the 4, I guess, or you're either the 3 or the 4. We'd like to try to put you get you on the practice squad, keep you for a year. Mason and Aaron are out of here, and next year you and Drew, it's battle royal for the room. I don't know if they can tell him that or work a deal out with him, or if it's kind of an unspoken thing there. Because like I said, I mean, now, yeah, there is definitely, with Rodgers saying it's his last year, I don't think anybody views Mason Rudolph as a viable full-time starting quarterback, even as a bridge guy at this point in his career, despite how much the Steelers might like him. It's an interesting spot. I think I agree with you there that I think it's good news for Aller. I don't necessarily want a whole lot to do with Mason Rudolph, period, unless I'm counting on Aaron Rodgers to be one of my guys, one of my starters, and then maybe I want his backup, Mason Rudolph. If I have 3 quarterbacks on my roster and I'm counting on Aaron Rodgers to be my number 2, I am going to try and shop him, in my opinion, in Dynasty, because if Aaron is my number 2, but I have a 3rd guy on the roster, what's really the difference between that number 2, between Rodgers, what I'm going to get from him, and what I'm going to get for anybody else? I just told you it was QB 26. There's only 32 teams on a points per game basis. So what's really the difference between Aaron Rodgers and whoever I have behind him who's actually still a starting quarterback in the league? So if he's my number 2, I'm willing to take anything I can get from him, because I know I'm not going to get anything from him after this season, right? And the difference between what he gives me and what a guy behind him is going to give me is negligible, at least based on recent, history and what I see as happening with him this year. If he's my 3rd and I'm contending, like you said, yeah, okay, I'm probably keeping that. Unfortunately, it means I end up having to cut him Ryan Tannehill style or whatever after the season. But it's just weird case there in that Pittsburgh quarterback room after taking quarterbacks in the draft the last 2 seasons, keeping Mason Rudolph around, and now bringing back the ancient one to be their starter there. So
before we move on from the Steelers, can I offer you one footnote?
Yeah.
What I think is kind of interesting here, and it's one of those things where it would have been a long shot anyways, but I kind of think in a roundabout way that bringing back Rodgers is like the nail in the coffin for Caleb Johnson. Because if he's not getting onto the field because he's not trusted in pass protection, right? And that seems to be the case.
Yeah.
And maybe you would consider getting him on the field with Aller or someone mobile, right?
Somebody
not doing it with Rodgers. If it's literally, if the problem is Rodgers goes in practice, you can't protect me and I don't want to be hit, you're not seeing the field, dude. And
Rodgers may make that determination on his own. He may turn around and practice one day and be like, F this dude.
Yeah, exactly.
Because at this point in his career, why would he?
And if Caleb Johnson has 70 carries through his first 2 seasons, he's as good is out of there from like
Right.
dynasty value consideration. So someone who was definitely well regarded coming into the draft, and it kind of bears mentioning that as in a roundabout way, this does impact him, because I think if the Steelers were going with that younger direction, then maybe he does get a real shot. But if they're trying to contend, it's hard for me to believe that he has any shot of breaking into the carries of the top two backs there.
All right. Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. That's interesting connection to make, but I'm not going to disagree with it. I think you're dead on there. Okay, moving on to another quarterback room that is kind of a cluster, right now. Opposite end of the country, though, Arizona. New head coach Mike LaFleur coming in, new offensive coordinator Nathaniel Hackett, but Mr. Jacoby Brissett is holding out. Kind of a loose holdout. I mean, he's skipping their voluntary OTAs right now or whatever, and he's not in camp at the moment. Okay, but they've got Jacoby Brissett holding out, wants a little bit more money. They bring in Gardner Minshew in free agency to ostensibly be the number 2 guy there, but then they go out and they draft Carson Beck in the 3rd round. He's one of the highest drafted quarterbacks in the class, and now we've got, a couple of throws of him, in shorts, tossing the football around in an NFL camp. So everybody on Twitter that follows the Cardinals is all hopped up. This is a team that's expected to be one of the worst in the NFL. And right now they don't know what's going on with their quarterback room. So, from the Jacoby Brissett standpoint, I've said it before, he's a professional guy. I love what Jacoby Brissett brings to a football team, because when and if you have to rely on him, he's going to just do the job. Okay. But Jacoby Brissett's 33 years old. From his standpoint, I get it. This is probably his last shot to get anything resembling starting quarterback money, even for a year or two in the NFL. This is probably it for him that way. He was the 2025 QB 16 overall. In fantasy, he was the quarterback 18 in points per game, performed well that way. But if you look at the stats and how he performed on the actual football field, that Cardinal offense performed much better under him last season than under Kyler Murray, both on a points per drive basis, so scoring the actual football, on a yards per play basis, so just being able to sustain drives. They performed better under Jacoby Brissett than they had under Kyler Murray. And honestly, if you look at the entire Jonathan Gannon era, which spanned all of 3 years, unfortunately, in Arizona for them, it was the most efficient performance on offense for the Cardinals overall in his time there. Now, yes, Kyler Murray battled injuries for a lot of that, and Gannon's a defensive coach and whatever. But the point is, from Brissett's standpoint, hey, I gave you guys the best thing you had for several years now. All I'm asking is a little bit more money to do it again for at least one more year. Minshew is 30 years old. Obviously not necessarily starter material at this point in his career. I think we've all given up on that. That ship has sailed, but he could be a bridge type quarterback to Beck. But do we believe Beck is the future? He was the only quarterback that he's the only quarterback on the roster who's signed past this season. Keaton Slovis, their 4th stringer, even is not signed past this current season and doesn't necessarily warrant mentioning. How do we see this shaking out for this season? Who do you think? I'm going to give you 2 questions here. Who is the starting quarterback for the Arizona Cardinals this season? Okay. And is that the best outcome for fantasy for 2026? Let's just look at it. 2026. What's your answer there?
I think that week 1, it'll be Brissett. I'm curious how long that lasts. And I think that the longer you get Brissett, the better for everyone involved, fantasy-wise. I guess except Beck, obviously. Well, and even then, giving him some time might be good for him.
Might be the best. Yeah, dude. Right away.
Yeah. One of the ones that I think is the most interesting is, like, this is such an important season, I think, for people's perspectives of Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yes.
And man, I'd be really scared if I were him that if Beck comes in, you just put up another 900 yard season, and it's like, you're just
not even his fault.
You're okay, I guess.
Really.
But
yep.
but you're not the guy we expected, right? Like, I would be, and it sucks that it, like, even this is like, oh, I'm banking on Brissett to like save my public perception, but here we are, right? So
Right.
I'd be really hopeful for his sake. And it candidly, if you have him in Dynasty, like, I'd be really hopeful that Brissett is the starter for as long as possible, because it gives you the pathway for Marvin Harrison Jr. to be an effective guy like this season. And the dynasty value for Marvin Harrison Jr. still exists. Like, as much as the public perception is very negative on him, he still gets treated like a guy who had the profile that he did coming in, who has been slightly disappointing, but not bad. He hasn't been bad. He's been disappointing.
Right. And I just said they've had chaos at the quarterback position basically his entire career.
But one more disappointing season, and I think that the benefit of the doubt, even in dynasty circles, is going to really, really slip.
Are you willing to play that perception up and try and buy him right now? Or are you willing to hold yourself because you're worried about this year?
I think it's another one where if I'm rebuilding specifically, like, it's very similar to Rashee Rice. And it's funny, I think pricing wise, when we were talking about it, they're very close.
Yes.
I think in a rebuild, like, I still believe in the profile. I still believe in the player that I saw coming out. Like, I'd certainly consider it, especially like that same trade. Like, you told me I could trade like what is functionally Mekhi Lemon for Marvin Harrison Jr. I'm still taking that shot. Marvin Harrison Jr. is still pretty young. I don't have the actual number in front of me, but I want to say he's like 24 years old or something. He's 23 right now. He'll turn 24 before, like, during preseason. So functionally, 24.
He'll turn 24 in August. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd rather have him than Mekhi Lemon. I
agree.
So if I can get a trade like that done, I would be very much so interested. Like you said, especially as a rebuild, where just taking the swing is really valuable, because it paying off accelerates when I can get back into contention. And that's what I'm trying to do in a rebuild, right? Like,
right.
Ultimately, you want to spend as much time as you can in the parts of the league where you can make your buy-in back. And you want to shorten the amount of time where you're at the bottom trying to accumulate value. Like, that's the cycle we're doing here.
Okay, so what are you looking to do with this room in Dynasty? Are you buying Carson Beck? Obviously, with Brissett being 33, and I mean he's not long for the world, but we know quarterbacks can last for in terms of his NFL career, he is not done. Like I said, I think this is his last shot at any kind of sizable contract that he might be able to get. It wouldn't shock me to see Jacoby Brissett play for 6 more years. Be in the league for 6 more years. But are you buying Beck? Are you in on him now that he went someplace where we think he's probably going to get number 1 shot at being a starter next year, or has an outside shot at being a starter at some point this year? What's your take on this room dynasty wise?
I'm not going out of my way to get Beck. I'm not buying Beck. I'm just not a Beck guy. I think that's how I should preface that. But what I should say is, if you like Beck, like, I think, even like I said, I'm not going to do it because I just don't like the player enough. But if you do, I think this is like best case scenario landing spot for him. Like, genuinely, there
are weapons on this team. There are weapons on this team. They've got maybe the best tight end in all of football in Trey McBride. They just drafted Jeremiah Love, who everybody thinks is the next Bijan, Ashton Genty type, generational type running back. I use that term, very cautiously, because I've been burned in the past by calling someone generational, but I digress. But no, between Harrison and Michael Wilson in the receiving core, and Trey McBride at tight end, and Jeremiah Love, and a slew of other starting caliber running backs that are currently on the team, and all of whom, even Tyler Algier, in my opinion, all of whom can be guys who can catch the football as well. Like, they don't have to be locked into any kind of role. There are weapons on this team for any quarterback, whether it ends up being Jacoby Brissett this year or Carson Beck next year. So yeah, there is opportunity to be had here. But like you said, you're not a Beck guy. I wasn't a Beck guy either.
Yeah. Yeah, but if you like Beck, like genuinely, the situation's great. Like, yeah, the offensive line's not even that bad. You've got like your left tackle figured out. Like, there's a lot to love. This is a great quarterback landing spot. So
they're the team that just signed Isaac Sumalo that I talked about being a big loss for the Steelers. They're the team that brought him in. And actually, he was their biggest free agent signing, Gardner Minshew, included.
Yeah. So if you're in on Beck, then I think that this is a boon for him. I'm just not.
They drafted Chase Bisontis. The only move they made offensively that I don't like is that Nathaniel Hackett is their nominal offensive coordinator.
That, and I think we're going in with Kendrick Bourne being wide receiver 3.
And that hurts. That hurts. But Kendrick Bourne is a professional football player. He's not going to hurt that team. It's just he's not going to help anything.
Yeah.
He's a veteran who should know what he's doing.
If our biggest flaws are that we think the offensive coordinator stinks and the wide receiver 3 stinks, then like
right, then hell yeah.
As a landing spot, there's worse things.
So are you willing to hold Jacoby Brissett on your dynasty roster this year?
I think so. I mean, it depends on how I got him, right? Because ultimately it's one of those things where it's like, okay, sure, is this probably his peak value, or maybe the end of the season is peak value? That's probably true. But I also probably got Jacoby Brissett for next to nothing.
Right.
So it's one of those things where, I mean, if he comes out and he throws 35, 40 times a game again, even if it's only for 10 weeks, right? Like, to me, I can get some pretty good super flex starts out of that if he's like in my 2 to 3 range, where I'm playing my like those two, like Brissett and someone else, just like matchup wise, right? Like if I find myself in that position, I think it's worth it to hold on to him. If I've got a lot of room at the position, of course, I'm definitely willing to move on from him. He's not like, oh my gosh, he's locked into my roster. Like, he's so undervalued that I can't get rid of him. But I don't think he's someone who I'm like dying to just sell at the peak, because ultimately I probably just didn't get him for that much. I think in some leagues I got him off waivers when he got the job last season. You know what I mean? So,
right. But yeah, depending on how much how much stock your league puts into backup quarterbacks and stuff, yeah, he may have been available for you. You may have been able to grab him last year. He may not have been rostered. So, yeah, interesting situation. To finish things up here today real quick, there are still some names available on the free agent wire. There are not any superstars in terms of current fantasy value, but there are some names available. I'm going to throw a couple guys out there, and I want to see if you have any interest in picking these guys up in Dynasty at all. Okay. Knowing that, okay, yes, so I guess what I'm going to say is, what I want from you is, do you think there's a path to value for 2026? And are you willing to take a chance on this guy, anything in Dynasty? Okay. If you're willing to take the guy in Dynasty, what would you be willing to give up for you? Let's go rapid fire with just a couple of names here real quick. We'll start off with, maybe the biggest name that's still left out there free agent wise now that Rodgers has signed at the quarterback position. Russell Wilson is 37 years old. Last year, 119 pass attempts, only completed 69 of them for 831 yards, 3 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Played in 6 games. He is still available out there. Do you see a path to any kind of fantasy relevancy for him in 2026? And what would that path be? Do you want anything to do with him Dynasty?
The path is pretty much like a real starter getting hurt. And what I'm willing to give up for him is the fab when it happens. That's where I'm at. I'm not rostering him.
Can you name a team where right now you think Russell Wilson would definitively be the QB2? Is there a team off the top of your head that you think he would be definitively the quarterback 2, so that if and when that starter gets hurt, he would be a starter?
I mean, who's the backup for the Jets? That's maybe like where I would go.
He just drafted Klubnik, and
Brady Cook and Paige Klubnik are like the next guys. So I'd say like for the Jets, maybe, especially if like the offense is getting utilized well and like things are kind of looking good when it happens.
Would you take him over Quinn Ewers in Miami? Even to help Malik Willis along? I don't think, honestly, and I hate Quinn Ewers. I don't know.
I think he is a better quarterback than Quinn Ewers. I think Miami would be dumb to do it. I think that Miami in their current situation would be better served giving the reps to the younger quarterback.
Okay, so I agree with you completely. Is Russell Wilson, does he have any value dynasty-wise right now whatsoever?
Right now, no. If you told me he was worth a 4th or 5th round pick,
take it all day.
4 months from now, I wouldn't be like that shocked, but that'd be like, oh my gosh, Justin Herbert went down and Russell Wilson came in as the backup. Like, all right, sure, then I'll give you a 4th.
So are you willing to drop him? Are you willing to drop him?
Yes.
In most cases, okay. Jimmy Garoppolo, 34 years old. Last season, no pass attempts. He literally came into 3 games to take 3 kneel downs in each one. He had 9 rush attempts for -10 yards. That's his stat line for last season. Jimmy Garoppolo, 34 years old. Is there any path to him being fantasy viable for the rest of his life? Because that's going to answer whether or not we think that he's, got any value, but dynasty-wise. Go ahead.
If you told me with absolute certainty that he was the QB2 for the San Francisco 49ers or the Los Angeles Rams, then sure.
But he's not going to be.
If in any and all other situations, no.
I agree. Okay. And so Jimmy, you're still a beautiful human being. But yeah, we're done with you fantasy wise. You can live in somebody else's other types of fantasies, but not in our football ones anymore. Nick Chubb is only 30 years old, but that's old for a running back. And Nick Chubb is an old running back. 2025 season, 122 carries for 506 yards, 3 touchdowns, 81.8 fantasy points in half PPR settings. Is Nick Chubb, is he cooked? Or does anybody pick him up?
Probably. I think he'd be worth. I'll give you this. If he signed somewhere interesting, I would put in a bid with $0.
Right. Like, yeah.
Get rid of a roster
on the roster. Right. Give me one interesting landing spot. Do you have an interesting landing spot for him?
In mind immediately, no. I think a lot of it would be either injury related or somewhere, and I'm trying to think through places, but of course one's not immediately jumping to mind, but somewhere where you can get almost that, like, what I'm picturing is like a late career Adrian Peterson role, right, where I'm functionally just bringing in this guy to be a battering ram on the goal line, or like late career LeGarrette Blount. Like, if you told me that happens, then I would, then he's worth being on a roster, right?
Right. I would say like Baltimore, except they just drafted Adam Randall. I don't know. Yeah. If Henry went down, hey, step in there and try to be the hammer. But they just drafted Adam Randall.
If Price went down in Seattle, I'll give you that one.
There we go. Okay. So that would be an interesting spot, like you said, where you'd put in a claim for him, but otherwise we're cooking him. Najee Harris, a guy who has been a fantasy starter in the past when he was getting volume, but is now coming off, bad injury. And last year, 15 carries, 61 yards, no touchdowns, 28 years old for a running back. Najee Harris, is there anywhere he could be fantasy viable? And do you want anything to do with him dynasty?
I mean, it's kind of like the same situation, just a little bit better. He's a little bit younger, and the injury, while bad and more recent, wasn't nearly as severe. Like Nick Chubb's was horrific. So it's kind of like the same situation on the whole, right? Where it's like the odd situation where he can come in and be a red zone guy or fill in for an injured guy is interesting. But outside of that,
Najee Harris is a guy who had 94 targets. Now,
I was going to say
5 years ago, he had 94 targets one year as a running back, and doesn't necessarily have to be all the way locked into only being a hammer on the goal. I think there's more receiving juice left in Najee Harris's life than there ever was in Nick Chubb's, after his injury.
And that's what makes him a little more valuable, right? Like if you told me he signed to Seattle tomorrow, he's immediately interesting because he could take Charbonnet's role.
Right.
Like while Charbonnet's hurt, obviously.
Yep. Nope. I agree there. Okay. Let's move on to wide receivers real quick. The top name here, in my opinion, Stefon Diggs, 32 years old. He's coming off a 1,000-yard season where he caught 85 out of 102 balls. I mentioned this in the previous weeks here. He caught 83% of the passes thrown to him. That was topped among all the top 50 wide receivers in fantasy there. Was scoring 9.9 fantasy points per game and a half PPR setting, which is not great for you, but I said he's 1,000 yards. Proved he's still a 1,000-yard receiver. Unsigned, but are you still interested in Stefon Diggs, and are you keeping him on your roster if you're a dynasty guy right now?
I'm probably not cutting him yet. I'm not like buying him or like going out of my way to acquire him at all, but if I have him, unless there's like I need to cut him for a draft pick or like something, then like sure. But if I have the room, then I'm probably going to try to keep him. He was super efficient last year. He looked good. Like, and that was even in like limited playing time. It's just like, he's late stage Rashee Rice. We're at like the end where the crazy talented scale is like hitting the crazies a little bit larger than the talented part.
Right. I mean, but we got good news on him that his legal troubles basically were quashed. But yeah, I'm not necessarily sure his intelligence is going to keep him out of, those kinds of situations.
Does
be a little erratic in terms of his personality, in terms of his diva-ishness, for lack of a better term. So, but Stefon Diggs, Deebo Samuel, Tyreek Hill, Keenan Allen. Of those four guys who are all as yet unsigned and all over 30 years old, Diggs, Deebo, Cheetah, Keenan Allen, who has the most value dynasty-wise for you right now as an unsigned free agent?
Probably Diggs. But the other one is like, I'm very curious to see what happens with Tyreek Hill. I think if you ask me what is the most likely situation, it's that we've seen the end of Tyreek Hill.
Sounded like it when he got hurt last year. I mean, the antics of waving on the way off the field and smiling and being, I'm injured, I don't have to do this shiznit anymore.
But the way he sounds now, and with the type of athlete he's been, like if he signed to a team, training camp and like, hey, he's rehabbing, he'll be back in like a month or something. Be interesting, especially depending on the team, right? If it's someone like the Cardinals, where wide receiver 3 is Kendrick Bourne. Like,
is there
I'm keeping a tab on it.
Is there any way on God's green earth that he goes back to Kansas City with as thin as that wide receiver room is, and not knowing if Rashee Rice is going to be?
Say, if Rashee Rice gets suspended, why not? Right?
Is that maybe his best? If he plays this season, is that the best outcome that he would possibly sign with Kansas City?
It might be. I guess it's
quarterback that knows him, a place he's comfortable with and that knows him and gets him away from Miami's nightlife. I mean, sorry, at Kansas City, I'm not ripping on your nightlife. I'm sure that, barbecue is fun, but like,
it's Miami.
It's not Miami.
Yeah. Or if you told me that he looked good and signed to the Raiders,
another team with a thin wide receiver room, and there are opportunities to be had. Okay, yeah, no, I had not given that one any thought. That would be at least intriguing.
Yeah, but looking good is like a massive emphasis.
Completely different, yes.
Because there's also like a world where he's not healthy until October.
Right.
Like that's the unknown here.
Right, and then who the hell knows, yeah.
And he's a crazy person. So there's any which way that situation could go, but it's one that I want to keep tabs on because the upside I think exists where if you told me that Tyreek Hill came back and was like a wide receiver 3 this season, is that crazy?
No.
If you told me he never played again, that crazy?
Yeah,
No.
Hey, that's outcome for everybody, except that it gives him more time to be in bed. And we know how many children that man has. Or what we think we know how many children that man has. Last name real quick at the tight end position, Jonnu Smith. We've talked about the Steelers a little bit. I told you he had 54 targets, caught 38 of them last year, 222 yards, 2 touchdowns. He was limited a little bit last year, but he was limited because he was sharing time literally 50-50 essentially or sharing looks anyway, 50-50 with Pat Freiermuth. This is a guy that we've seen very recently be a fantasy star when he was used as such. He's only 30, which is not old man territory for tight ends. Jonnu Smith do you have any interest in him right now? He's about the only tight end I really want to talk about right now.
Probably not. I mean, it'd be very dependent on like where he goes. Like maybe the Panthers would be like intriguing, but it's just really difficult. Tight end is one of the positions where I just feel like there's not a lot of particularly open spots, and he's one where like the scheme would have to be beneficial to him. It's not like, oh, you just drop him in and he gets an opportunity and it's going to work. It's like, also you need the right fit on top of it. So I don't think he's one where unless like something crazy interesting happens, like if you told me that couple Chargers tight ends gets hurt and suddenly comes in there, then like, okay, sure, that's interesting.
Now with Mike McDaniel, the head coach who made him a fantasy star a couple years ago, or the play caller who made him a fantasy star a couple years ago, I can agree with that. Yeah. But
technically possible, not likely.
Yeah. Not hoping, because we never hope for injuries, but like, counting on 2 injuries to get the guy fantasy relevant. I agree completely. Okay, that's going to do it for us here on Operation Domination for this week. Now, coming up over the next month, we are going to be doing our deep dives positionally here. We're going to be going over tiers at the position and talking about players from that standpoint. Next week, we'll be doing quarterbacks, so make sure you tune in for that. You can find Adam on X there at LaRue Adam. You can find me everywhere on social media at STTChaseFFB. You can find my baseball content over at Fantasy Sports Advice Network as well. Straight to the Chase, my fantasy podcast for baseball. You can find Dan Mader all over Twitter as well. You can find his written work over at The Huddle. So be sure to check us out, but join us next week when we start talking about, we're doing our deep dives into tiers in the fantasy realm. Until then, everybody, thanks for joining us here. Good luck. Go out there and dominate.